Well, we're going to begin on chapter 14 and see how far we go. Who would like to read starting with 14?
I can go.
Okay.
At that time, Herod the ruler heard reports about Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him." For Herod had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been telling him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Though Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company, and she pleased Herod so much that he promised on oath to grant her whatever she might ask. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." The king was grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he commanded it be given. He sent and had John beheaded in prison. The head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, who brought it to her mother. The disciples came and took the body and buried it, and then they went and told Jesus. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. When the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the village and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down in the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking towards them on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it was you, command me to come out to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret. After the people of that place recognized him, they sent word throughout the region and brought all who were sick to him and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed.
Okay, thank you. I really like the Peter story. It's unique to Matthew, where he gets on the water and walks with him. And there's always the question, was he brave to go out in the water or arrogant? And when he started to sink, was it because he lost faith in himself? And then when Jesus says, "You have little faith," was he talking about little faith in me or little faith in yourself? Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it raises all these interesting questions about how you perceive our own ability and what we can do and what we should do. And
I find it interesting, going back a little further, that Herod was assuming that Jesus was John the Baptist when this, I realize there's some time it transpired, but not enough for John the Baptist to be resurrected into a fully grown man.
Right.
I don't know what their beliefs were about resurrection and returns, but he took John the Baptist's head, so it's not like the dude had gotten his head spliced back on again.
Right. No, it is an interesting thing because John the Baptist is often said to be like Elijah reincarnated. And then the fact that he wonders if Jesus is it resurrected or reincarnated? And of course, a little bit of a difference. Which did he think it was, and what were their beliefs? It is interesting, because they did live at the same time, and they would have been in the same place at time, but
Definitely
Yeah.
can't be like the Hindu idea of, or Buddhist ideas of reincarnation, where you're reborn as a baby. It had to been, he must have been thinking it'd be more like what we see later with Jesus' resurrection 3 days later, and where some people didn't recognize him. Like they might, there's this implication that maybe he came back looking a little bit different. Maybe there was an idea going around in those days that people could come back as an adult but looking a bit different,
Why was
fleshed again somehow.
yeah? Sorry, are you done?
I don't know. Yeah, sorry.
Why was John telling Herod that he shouldn't be with his wife? Was she not his wife?
So, Herod, I don't know if his brother Philip was still alive or not. But he somehow marries his brother's wife. Now, according to Jewish law, that would be okay if your
Right.
brother died.
Oh, so maybe he's still alive.
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. And so he's shacking up with his brother's wife, and that really goes against
Got it.
Jewish law.
It's a questionable marriage kind of situation that would have gotten all the tongues clicking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also love how the feeding of the 5,000, which we think of as the 5,000, was really probably closer to like 25,000 because women and children didn't even count.
Right. Right.
5,000 men besides women and children.
Right.
Yeah, we didn't bother counting them.
Right.
Yeah.
But we'll just offhandedly mention they were there.
Yeah.
Right.
It feels like extra work to look out in the crowd and just count the men, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's 2 men in this room, but also some women. and
Yes.
children. Okay.
Yes. It's,
And not that the number really matters, but I mean, really, it's even more amazing that Jesus
Yeah.
could have fed 100,000. He could have fed 5 million if he wanted with
Yeah.
2 fish and 5 loaves or whatever.
It's possible that, I mean, it feels really offensive by our standards, but it's also possible that was a way of counting family units.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 5,000
If you
families.
assume each of those was a head of household.
Yeah, that makes sense. It wouldn't have just probably not been independent adults just randomly coming. It would have actually probably been families and villages. Yeah, that's interesting. I know that there's been debate about the daughter of Herodias and how guilty she was. I've heard everything from her conspiring with her mother, and they were both kind of rotten, to her being very, very much under the thumb of her mother and Herod. And I think that a lot of this is conjecture and stories that have gone around, but that, yeah, Herod liked to look at her dance is creepier than it sounds.
which is pretty creepy.
Yeah, and that her mother put her daughter in a very, very bad situation, and that she really had no choice in what was going on. And so, in that way, she is very much a pawn of being used by these adults. Yeah,
And very much to secure her mother's position. Because her
yeah,
position is threatened right now.
I suppose.
Unless she
Yeah,
removes John the Baptist.
yeah, yeah.
Of course, you need to also take this with a grain of salt too, because, I mean, how would we really get this information? How would Matthew have gotten this information on what exactly was going on behind the scenes without making some assumptions and maybe possibly embellishing a bit as well? So,
True.
Yeah, I think it's the, if you've heard the term midrash, midrash is a Jewish practice where they would take a Bible story like this and then they would wonder about the fuller story. And it was a very common thing to do, and so you could have 5 different people who'd midrash on this woman, Salome, which we often call her, and have 5 different backstories. And they do that not to imagine theirs is right or wrong, but just to go deeper into the meaning of the story and what it might mean, and maybe find more compassion or more, what are the complexity of the issues. So that was very common in the Jewish tradition, and we don't do it a whole lot in Christianity, especially right now. We're very focused in, well, is it true or not?
Yeah.
Did it happen or not, rather than what does it mean?
We're so black and white.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would it mean for Salome to have been in an abused situation, and how does that relate to other truths we might see in this world about powerful people who are enslaved in their own way, rich people who are enslaved in their own way, versus her being a willing participant? Like, how does that change the story and our understanding of power and religion and everything like that? So, yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else? Should we move to 15? Okay, someone else want to read?
I'm going to go next then. Then Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands before they eat." He answered them, "And why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, 'Honor your father and your mother,' and whoever speaks evil of father and mother must surely die. But you say, 'Whoever tells father or mother, whatever support you might have had from me is given to God,' then that person need not honor your father. So for the sake of your tradition, you make void the word of God. You hypocrites! Isaiah prophesied rightly about you when he said, 'The people honor me more with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines.' Then he called the crowd to him and said to them, 'Listen and understand. It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles the person. It is what comes out of the mouth that defiles.' Then the disciples approached him and said to him, 'Do you know that the Pharisees took offense when they heard what you said?' He answered, 'Every plant that my heavenly Father has planted will be uprooted. Let them alone, and are blind guides of the blind. And if one blind person guides another, both will fall into a pit.' But Peter said to him, 'Explain this parable to us.' Then he said, 'Are you also still without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth enters the stomach and goes out into the sewer? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this is what defiles. For out of the heart comes evil intentions, murder, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile." Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Then a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at first. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, and saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, even the dogs eat crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. After Jesus had left that place, he passed along the Sea of Galilee, and he went up the mountain where he sat down. Great crowds came to him, bringing with them the lame, the maimed, the blind, the mute, and many others. They put him at his feet, and he cured them. For the crowd was amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the maimed whole, the lame walking, and the blind seeing. And they praised the God of Israel. Then Jesus came he called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for the crowd, because they have been with me now for 3 days and have had nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, for they might faint on the way. The disciples said to him, Where are we going to get enough bread in the desert to feed such a great crowd? Jesus asked them, How many loaves do you have? And they said, 7, and a few small fish. Then, ordering the crowd to sit down on the ground, he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and after giving thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all of them ate and were filled. And they took upon the broken pieces left over 7 baskets full. Those who had eaten were 4,000 men, besides women and children. After sending away the crowds, he got into the boat and went to the region of Magadan. It seems that we just read that story
Yep.
in the previous chapter. So this is the second time that he
Yep.
fed the multitudes. This time slightly smaller, with 4,000 instead of 5,000.
And his disciples were just as surprised.
Yes.
They're slow learners.
Just as shocked, very much. So the first time he's in Jewish territory, and the second time he is in Gentile territory. That's the difference, and the numbers are significant because he, when they're done with the first feeding, they have 12 baskets left over. So he's in
12
Jewish
tribes of
territory, and
Israel.
there's 12 baskets. He goes to the Gentile territory, and there's 7 baskets left over. 7 is a number of completion. So it's symbolic that he isn't just feeding. And notice this comes right after the woman says, Can I have bread falling from the crumbs?
And he initially refuses that.
He refuses it. And so there are some theologians who say that this woman can be credited with opening Jesus' mind up to the fact that he's not just here for Jewish people. He's here for everybody. Because immediately what he does after talking with her is he teaches, heals, and feeds Gentiles.
I struggle with that. I struggle with like the notion that Jesus, not that he, I don't know. I feel like he came with the intention for everyone, like that he already wanted to include everyone. I don't know. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because I struggle with that he would have, I don't know, somehow been limited in that way. But I know, like you said, we struggle with his humanity in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always felt that way too, like this commission from the start would have been for everybody, but it's interesting to explore the idea too that maybe his mission evolved. Because I haven't thought about that way before.
I mean, there is the covenant between Israel and God, where the Gentiles were all over the place, and some had heard about the Israelite God, but of course, with all the gods out there at the time, that was just one more god in this pantheon of the gods that are being worshipped at the time.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. And he did grow up in a Jewish world, and the understanding of being Jewish was not just religious, it was ethnic, it was tribal, it was very, very established. It was, you could probably tell from people's accents and their clothing who belonged where. And it's hard for us to imagine being that separated. We kind of go everywhere, and people look like us everywhere, right? The United States is huge, and we can go all across the United States and easily find places where people look like us, talk like us. But if Bloomington was in and of itself the only place where everyone was Lutheran, we would have such a strong identity. And so you can imagine Jesus growing up in that Jewish world and feeling like there's something broken here, there's something people are missing, I need to help them and reconnect with them. And that would have been a huge focus. That's a specific language, that's a specific understanding of God. That's a common scripture. But you go to the Gentiles and they don't have that. They don't have the same understanding of God, the same scriptures. So it's a completely different language and a completely different mission. You know, the way I'm going to talk to a Christian is completely different from the way I might talk to a Muslim or a Hindu or, you know, someone who doesn't believe in God at all. So it just might have been something like a growing awareness where Jesus was here to help and here to demonstrate something, but didn't realize how universal his mission might actually be. Talking about how in chapter 15, Jesus first feeds the Jewish people, and then he encounters a Syrophoenician woman who's not a Jew, and she asks for healing for her daughter, and he says, no, you know, I'm here for the, right? And directly after that encounter where he's impressed with her faith, he feeds 4,000 Gentiles. And that's a sort of a symbolic understanding that he realized, I'm here for more than just the Jewish people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I've pictured like God the Father and Jesus literally having a conversation before Jesus comes to earth. I just realized this. And, you know, the Father saying, you're going to go here and I want you to show all the people. Like, that's honestly what I think happened, or what I guess I thought happened.
Yeah.
So that Jesus was fully aware and into that, like, the second he got here. But I don't know why I think that.
And it may be. It may be. One of the understandings that some people have before we incarnate is we sort of have a discussion like that.
Mm-hmm.
We have, these are your ultimate goals. This is what you're here to learn. This is what you're here to do. Like an outline, right? There's so much room for, the fact that I wore these shoes is not part of God's plan. That was my choice. Like that. But there are things I'm here to do and learn. And I'm growing in awareness of that every year and every day as I mature and change. And so Jesus may have had a strong feeling of, okay, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. But even the cross might have been something that at some point he was like, oh no, you know, like
He asked to get out of it.
yeah. If there's any way to
Yeah.
get out of this. And some people like to believe he was kind of born knowing, I will go to the cross one day, and maybe he did, but I think it's much more human to think that he had very strong feelings of what he needed to do, and that some of those awarenesses unfolded the more he went along on his journey. And in reality, that's probably true with all of us. Yeah.
Like a guy going to war.
What?
Like a guy going to war.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, should we jump into 16 here? We're doing well today.
Yeah.
All right, my turn.
Christy, yeah.
Okay, I'm reading all of okay, not too bad. The Pharisees and Sadducees came, and to test Jesus, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. He answered them, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. An evil and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. Then he left them and went away. When the disciples reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. Jesus said to them, watch out and beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. They said to one another, it is because we have brought no bread. And becoming aware of it, Jesus said, you of little faith, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many baskets you gathered? How could you fail to perceive that I was not speaking about bread? Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Then they understood that he had not told them to beware of the yeast of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Then Jesus told his disciples, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly, I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom."
No. I want to hear what you have to say about the keys of the kingdom. What is this?
Oh, yeah,
What is that even talking about?
yeah,
Because I'm still not clear on it.
yeah.
And I've heard it go all sorts of ways. I just want to hear your way.
On what kingdom?
The keys of the
Oh,
kingdom.
the keys?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is where we get the image of Peter standing at the singular gate of heaven holding the keys to let you in or out, which is very, very literal misunderstanding of the
Or
concept.
it's also part of the symbol of the Pope.
Yeah.
Keys.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
whole
yeah.
passage is what the Catholic Church uses to establish all their power.
Absolutely. So they're talking about Peter as being the literal important person. And then the church is based off of St. Peter, and the keys of the kingdom is that they hold salvation. Through the church of Peter, there's salvation. And I think there is the belief that salvation is not found outside of the Catholic Church because Jesus said this. So they've relied on Matthew a lot for this. But another way to look at it is the confession that Peter said that is the rock. It is the faith and trust, which makes sense because remember at the very beginning of the sermon, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, be like the person who built their house on the rock. It's not a person. If you do his way and follow in his way, you're building your house on the rock. So walking on the road, that's the rock. So in that moment, Peter was getting it the best he could. And Jesus was affirming it and saying, yes, you're getting it. And this is what the church will be built off of, is this getting it. And then the keys of the kingdom are, I mean, you could look at it a couple ways, but it is responsibility of what you do with the people who come to you. So there's great power in being the one who carries a message and teaches people how to walk on the road. And you can do great damage with that power, or you can liberate. So this isn't about power for the sake of power. This is responsibility. I'm giving you a message. I'm asking you to teach people how to walk down the road, and you have to be responsible for it. I think in another passage it says, or maybe it's here, I'm reading it slightly different. Whatever you loose is loosed in heaven, whatever you bind is bound in heaven. And again, that's a warning. So if I come to you and I tell you that you're going to hell because you're wearing a gray shirt, you know, and I have the power as a pastor to make you think that, that's on me. I just bound you with a rule that was damaging, right? That's maybe not super damaging, but we've done that, right? We have, as a church, put things on people that have been deeply damaging. And we have also taken off and unburdened people. So great power comes great responsibility. And so I don't think, some people say that I have the power as the church, or the church has the power to condemn and to free people. No, I don't think you have the power, but you certainly have the power to make people think that, and that can bind them up in a way that can be a self-defeating prophecy. Right?
I think that power is almost as strong as the power to literally damn someone. Because if you can convince someone that they're going to hell, then they're going to give up.
Yeah, absolutely. You wrap people with enough shame, fear, and guilt, and you're putting them in hell. And that is an awful way to treat the power that Jesus gave you to have people walk on the road. So what are you binding people with, and what are you taking away? We do have to bind some people. There are those who would cause great damage to the community. There are those who would prey and take advantage because they are hurt inside themselves. They will cause damage. We do have the responsibility as a church to bind with boundaries, with rules, with good practices, even saying you're not welcome here anymore if they're causing that much damage. That's an appropriate binding for the good of the community.
But that would be just to this church, not to God.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, because you can wish someone the best and say, good luck to you, I hope you find peace, blessings, I release you, but this community this is not good. This is not a good fit. This is not a good fit.
Yeah.
And that would be okay.
So if Peter just got it, and this is the thing, like, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God, why did Jesus not want anyone else to know that then? Like, why did he say, don't tell anyone that I'm the Messiah?
Right.
I think because they wouldn't have got it. If he said, "Oh, he's the Messiah," they'd have immediately started worshiping him, and that would have closed them to his message. Because they all wanted this concrete here to go kick out the Romans and
Because
kick
they
their butts.
wanted the military thing,
Yeah.
That's a great question. I hadn't thought that it could have been many different things.
There's a great story that I love of a Sufi mystic. So that's the Muslim mystic wing. And this young Sufi guy was meditating, and all of a sudden he opened his eyes. He had this huge revelation. He started running through the town going, I am God. I am God. And everyone was looking at him like he was crazy and this is blasphemy. And then an older Sufi grabbed him inside and he goes, what are you doing? He goes, in my meditation, I just realized we're all God. And he goes, yeah, I know, but you don't run around the streets saying this. They're not ready for it. They don't know. And that's why we come to these realizations and we talk, everyone's on their own stage. And I think Jesus understood that there are some levels of truths that not everyone's ready for, which is one reason he told parables to the large group, and then he shared and explained more deeply what they meant to the disciples because they were supposed to be ready for that. And so they could confess he was the Messiah, but don't go sharing that where, let them come to it on their own, with their own understanding.
Well, I think that he also told somebody he healed not to go tell other people about stuff.
Yes, exactly.
And maybe because it just wasn't time for certain people to digest that.
Yeah.
Well, look what happens when they do eventually get the idea. Everybody does eventually get the idea that he's the Messiah.
Yeah.
They drape all those branches down the streets before him,
Yeah.
praising him, and the authorities eventually have to get him killed.
Yeah.
So it's all over then.
Yeah.
So if it happened too soon, his ministry wouldn't have gotten very far.
It's interesting to me how much Jesus is trying to bring a new paradigm. He's trying to describe it, he's trying to show it in word and deed. In every interaction, he's trying to get everybody to stop getting stuck in this rut of what the world has been and to open up to something new. And they get it here and then they don't get it here. And you just imagine how exhausting that must have been.
It can be hard, it can be exhausting, because we're not all as patient as the Sufi in your story, the elder. And it's like, don't you get it, don't you get it? No, they don't.
Well, just think, after 2,000 years, nobody gets it either.
Yeah.
Well, again, I'm agreeing with you. I have a comment, please, because
Yeah.
this thing about bind on earth, bound in heaven,
Yeah.
and I'm not gonna go too deep, but I will point out, binding and losing does mean that to some degree, I'm arguing against those who say men cannot be married or be joined. That we are saying, as you said in your message, two souls. In a committed relationship. I'm using the language of the LCA now. In a committed, trusting relationship. And that if we're loose, if we're doing that, that means it's okay. Am I making sense? Binding and losing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you talking about homosexual marriage?
Yeah, binding
Yeah,
and losing.
yeah.
Because we say, I'm saying not everybody says this. I'm acknowledging that. But in terms of how we interpret this, that if we as the people of God can bind, by that same authority we can lose. That's what I'm saying. And it becomes,
So if we say it's okay, it's okay?
yeah, as the community, right? Man, I'm trying to use language you've used to help communicate here. That if the community says, yeah, this is acceptable.
So, but with that comes great responsibility, which you said, what we do.
Well, that becomes a committed relationship part, and so on. And for example, how many years after the first gay lesbian marriages did we start having the divorces? Follow me? The realities of real life
Yeah.
affecting even gay lesbian relationships.
And that, just to piggyback off of that, the conversation was brought forward because people were saying we're doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
What we thought was a good law of protecting people, people are coming in forward and saying, no, this has actually been harming. And so as a community, we discerned and realized that we had a law of binding that was no longer good. And so we took that away. And I read recently about the ripeness, when you do something unripe, it's evil, bisha, and then we're supposed to act ripely. There are times in which something is good for a certain time and place, and then another generation realizes it's no longer ripe. And we can see that with certain practices that people found super great in the 1950s. And now we have a couple generations later, they would never do that because it doesn't feel ripe, it doesn't feel good. And so there's a certain level to understanding human culture and what's good for us as a society that is ongoing. And I think God gives us the freedom to figure it out.
And I think God gives us the freedom to say, you had it wrong.
Yeah,
You had it wrong. You're
You had it
human.
wrong.
You're only human.
we're only human.
And so we are going to make mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by how differently groups of people can see the world. How, for example, right now, there's a certain group of people who've been taught to see a threat in drag queens, which they have zero track record of causing harm. Zero track record. On the other hand, the same group of people seems to be very quiet about ongoing sexual abuse and rape and incest and pedophilia that is often completely swept under the rug in the same communities. And so it fascinates me how we mature and grow in our perspective to truly understand what is damaging and what is not, and why as a community we get thrown off by someone who doesn't fit in our box, because that's part of what it is. You have a man who dresses up as a woman, therefore he doesn't fit in the box of what we think is proper, but somehow we're not going to talk about this absolutely damaging, soul-destroying act that, right? So it just fascinates me, and I don't have an answer, but it is definitely something we do need to talk about as churches, is understand what is truly harmful in our families and lives and communities, and what is simply just the freedom to be the fullness of all God made us to be, and what's the difference, right?
Yeah, I just, my heart, I know how damaging it is. But could you imagine being a person that is attracted to kids? I just can't even imagine. That's just terrible. And it's terrible for society, it's terrible for everything. Such a curse I would never, the curse is so great that on that poor person that I feel so sorry for him.
Yeah.
That's one of those binding things, though, where you can't allow them
No, I
access
agree
to the
with
kids,
you.
but yet you need to get them the help they need.
Absolutely. That's a line. There's certain lines that you just can't be crossed.
Right.
I would throw in another Nicholsworth here, just to.
What are you saying?
I'd like to throw in another Nicholsworth. Are you aware that down in Florida, they've introduced legislation to remove transgender children from those households so that they can bring them up properly?
What?
That's being pushed in Florida right now.
Yeah, there are some pretty disturbing bills.
And
There's a lot
what
of
bothers me is the current atmosphere is such they might pass that law. And excuse me.
I thought the one that just passed in South Dakota was bad. That's a lot worse.
Yeah, well, it's as the article led, it's a fascist move.
It is. It is fascist.
I mean,
Yeah. And
there's
it's-
a general thought control strain to a lot of these.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's, you don't
but
like the
again,
way
if
you're
that gets
raising your kids, so you
legislated.
take them away.
What's weird about it is a year ago this wasn't part of the conversation.
No,
This
not
is
remotely.
literally the imaginary monster of the month, that we're using this as a way to exact power over, to continue. It's just very controlling dark power energy that's going on, and
Yeah.
it's very disturbing because it's focusing on all the wrong things, but that's the point.
Yeah.
That's the point. If we can create imaginary monsters and then show you how we're controlling the imaginary monsters, you're not going to look and see what we're really doing
Yeah.
and how we're really controlling things.
Yeah, and when they talk about, what I read is, they're trying to return us to traditional values.
No, that's a...
I'm just telling you what I
I
read.
know.
Whatever
Yeah.
you
Rope
think.
Street.
And the people who believe that
Yep.
Yeah.
do it,
Yeah.
buy into it, because yes, they are uncomfortable.
Yep.
And so it'd be easier to deal with my homophobia by just saying it's terrible, it's an abomination, et cetera, et cetera. Let's just make sure kids don't grow up that way.
So there's a yin yang. Okay. So, and then you just see here with the last thing I just saw on TV where Governor Walz is getting together and allowing people who have had felons to vote. And I'm going, wow, is there some forgiveness and everything there like that?
Yeah.
So you see this wave coming up a little
Yeah.
bit in one place, and then you see this downward thing and another thing, and you just go, I don't know.
So I have some kind of spiritual teachers who talk about this, sort of the big dynamics in the world, and they said one of the things we're seeing is because there has been movement made towards more freedom and towards more of these good, beautiful things, the people who are trying to assert power and control and don't understand this feel deeply threatened by it. In no way does that mean we stop moving in the way we're doing, but you can almost expect their backlash and their attempt to bring things back, because people who are free can't be controlled, right? People who are free and forgiven and living their own lives with the control to live their own lives can't be controlled. And that, for people who need to control, who want to control, that's threatening. So they invent whatever it is they need to invent to make people afraid, because once people are afraid, they say, well, I've got the answer to your fear. Give your control to me, and I will protect you. That's how it works. And so one of the best things we can do as people of faith is to see when the conversation is turning towards fear and manipulation versus a real conversation of what is good and healthy for the community, that gives power away, that empowers people to work together and make decisions, versus one person clamping down using fear and manipulation, which is what we're seeing happen in Florida and other places. So it's a very strong, scary energy. But the best thing that we can do is to keep empowering, to keep going. At least then there might be some people who wake up from that and go, wow, that's nuts. That's insane. We don't want to be a part of that anymore.
Or at least we're taking care of the yang or the yin or one on the other side of it.
We're not going to let it get swallowed up by the darkness.
Yeah,
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 absolutely.
yeah.